Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Hub. Today's story is one of my favorites.
My name is Layla Hill, and I've been disappointing my father since the day I was born. Not because I wasn't smart enough or ambitious enough, hell, I had both in spades, but because I refused to play his game. While he built his empire on the backs of others, I chose to get my hands dirty, saving the forgotten ones. Everything changed. I was supposed to be playing chauffeur to some Ice Queen CEO at one of Dad's stuffy galas, Trinity Cooper. Even her name sounded like money and marble floors. I'd seen her picture in Forbes, all sharp angles and sharper suits, the kind of woman who probably had her coffee beans individually blessed by monks. The plan was simple: drive her to the event, stand around looking professional, drive her home. Easy money to fund my animal shelter. What I didn't expect was for her to be human. She slid into the backseat of the company, Mercedes wearing a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my annual budget. But when she caught me watching her in the rearview mirror, something flickered behind those steel gray eyes. Not the usual entitled dismissal I expected, but curiosity. Maybe even amusement. "You're not what I expected," she said, her voice carrying that upper crust accent that should have annoyed me, but somehow didn't. Disappointed? I asked, pulling away from her penthouse with more force than necessary, intrigued. The gala was everything I despised: crystal chandeliers, fake smiles, and conversations about quarterly projections over champagne that cost more than most people's rent. I watched Trinity work the room like a predator in designer heels, all calculating smiles and strategic handshakes. She was magnificent and terrifying, and I couldn't look away. That's when Dad cornered me by the bar. "Layla, sweetheart." His voice carried that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. "Behaving yourself tonight? Always do, Daddy." I kept my voice light, but my hands were already signing curse words behind my back, a habit I picked up working with deaf kids at the shelter. Good, because I have big plans for Cooper Enterprises, and I'd hate for any complications to arise. The way he said it, with that cold smile that never reached his eyes, made my stomach turn. But before I could respond, Trinity appeared, beside us like some avenging angel in Laboutins. "Mr. Hill," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Thank you for the lovely evening. Miss Cooper, the pleasure is all mine. I trust Layla has been adequate." I opened my mouth to step back, but Trinity beat me to it. "She's been exceptional. In fact, I was hoping she might be available for some additional work. I have a charity commitment coming up that could use her unique talents." The way she said it, with just enough emphasis on unique to make it sound like a compliment instead of a euphemism, had me fighting back a grin. Dad's smile faltered just enough to let me know he'd caught it too. "Of course," he said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you need." 20 minutes later, I was supposed to be driving Trinity home. Instead, I found myself peeling out of the parking garage while she gripped the door handle and punk rock blasted through the speakers. "Where are we going?" she shouted over the music. "Somewhere real," I called back, taking a corner fast enough to make her slide across the leather seat. I should have taken her straight home, should have maintained that professional distance, but the way she'd stood up to my father, the way she'd looked at me like I mattered, it cracked something open in my chest that I'd kept locked away for years. We ended up at an all-night diner in the warehouse district, the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead and the pie was made by someone's grandmother. Trinity looked completely out of place in her designer dress, but she didn't complain. She just slid into the cracked vinyl booth across from me and ordered coffee black. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around the chipped mug like it was a lifeline, "tell me about this shelter." I found myself talking for hours. About the animals nobody wanted, The kids who'd been forgotten by the system. The way sign language had become my second language because so many of the children I worked with had been failed by a world that didn't bother to listen. She didn't interrupt, didn't check her phone, just listened with an intensity that made my chest tight. "You're nothing like your father," she said finally, and something in her voice made me look up from my coffee. Is that good or bad? It's everything. The next morning, I woke up on Trinity's couch with a hangover and a mouth that tasted like regret. The penthouse was all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Which, knowing Trinity, it probably did. I found her in the kitchen, already dressed in another perfect suit, sipping coffee from a cup that probably cost more than my car payment. "Morning," I croaked, running a hand through my hair. She looked up, and for a moment, something soft flickered across her face before the mask slipped back into place. Coffee's on the counter. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the marble island, studying her. In the morning light, she looked smaller somehow, more fragile. The confident CEO from the night before had been replaced by someone who looked like she hadn't slept in days. "About last night," I started, but she held up a hand. "Last night was ... unprofessional. It won't happen again." What if I want it to happen again? The question hung between us like a live wire. Trinity's knuckles went white where she gripped her coffee cup, but she didn't look away. "You don't know what you're asking for," she said quietly. "Try me." 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in 3 inches of mud at the Riverside Animal Shelter, watching Trinity Cooper, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, trying to coax a traumatized pit bull out of his kennel. She was wearing designer jeans that probably cost more than my rent and already had paw prints on her white cashmere sweater. "Come on, Rex," she murmured, extending her hand slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog whimpered, pressing himself further into the corner of his kennel. He'd been found chained in a basement, beaten and starved, and trust didn't come easily to him. "You're trying too hard," I said, stepping up behind her. "He can smell your fear." "I'm not afraid of a dog." "You're afraid of caring about him?" Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't argue. I moved closer, close enough to smell her perfume, mixed with hay and disinfectant, and covered her hand with mine. "Let him come to you," I whispered against her ear. "Sometimes the broken ones just need to know you're not going anywhere." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of my voice, and slowly, carefully, he crept forward. His nose touched Trinity's fingers, and she sucked in a breath. "There you go," I said, my thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "You're a natural." When Rex finally let Trinity scratch behind his ears, the smile that spread across her face was worth every board meeting I'd have to sit through. But it was the way she looked at me afterward, like I'd just given her something precious, that made my chest tight. "Thank you," she said, and I knew she wasn't just talking about the dog. We fell into a routine after that. Trinity would show up at the shelter after work, trading her power suits for jeans and getting her hands dirty. She was surprisingly good with the animals, patient and gentle in a way that made me wonder who had hurt her badly enough to make kindness feel like a foreign language. The kids loved her too, especially the deaf ones. When she realized how much of our work involved sign language, she hired a private tutor and practiced for hours. Watching her fingerspell stories to a group of 8-year-olds was like watching someone discover color for the first time. "You're different here," I told her one evening as we locked up the shelter. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and she looked almost ethereal in the dying light. Different how? Softer, more ... you. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know me, Layla, not really." "Then tell me." We were standing close now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her gray eyes. close enough that when she reached up to touch my face, I could feel the tremor in her fingers. "I don't know how," she whispered, so I showed her. I kissed her there in the parking lot, with the scent of hay and hope in the air, and she kissed me back like she was drowning and I was oxygen. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "This is complicated," she said, her forehead pressed against mine. "The best things usually are." The fundraiser was Trinity's idea. A black tie event to raise money for the shelter, with all the corporate heavyweights in attendance. I hated every minute of it, but watching Trinity work the room was like watching an artist at work. She was in her element, churning donations out of people who probably kicked puppies for sport. "You clean up nice," she said, appearing at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. I tugged at the collar of my rented tux. "I feel like a fraud." "You look like a CEO. God, I hope not." Her laugh was genuine this time, the kind that made her whole face light up. "Come on, let's get out of here. The party's just getting started. The party can survive without us." She led me outside where her practical sedan sat in the parking lot like a guilty secret. I'd expected her to drive some ridiculous sports car, but Trinity was full of surprises. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled out of the lot, "Somewhere we can breathe." She drove us out of the city, past the suburban sprawl, and into the hills where the trees grew thick and the stars were actually visible. We ended up at a trailhead I'd never seen before, and she killed the engine. "How did you know about this place?" I asked. "I come here sometimes when the walls start closing in." She had a blanket in the trunk, along with a bottle of champagne and 2 real glasses. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, following a path that seemed to know where it was going, even if we didn't, until we reached a clearing where the trees opened up to reveal the city spread out below us like a circuit board. "My God," I breathed. "I know." She spread the blanket on the grass and settled down beside me. "I found this place right after my divorce. I was going crazy, living in that glass cage, and I just drove. Ended up here." "You were married?" "For about 5 minutes. To a man who loved my portfolio more than me." She poured champagne into both glasses and handed me one. "What about you? Ever come close?" "Once, in college." She wanted me to choose between her and the shelter. Bad choice. The worst. We drank in comfortable silence, watching the lights twinkle below us. The champagne was good, really good, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. "Can I ask you something?" Trinity said eventually. "Shoot." "Why animals? Why not people?" I considered the question, rolling it around in my mind like a smooth stone. Animals don't lie. They don't pretend to be something they're not. If a dog doesn't like you, you know it. If they love you, you know that too. People ... People are complicated, and you prefer simple. I prefer honest. She turned to look at me then, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "What if I told you I wasn't honest? What if I told you I was using you? Are you? I don't know anymore." There was something in her voice, something raw and vulnerable that made my chest tight. I set down my glass and turned to face her fully. "Trinity, what's going on?" "Your father," she said, and the words came out like a confession. "He's planning something. A merger. He's been circling Cooper Enterprises for months, and he's using you to get to me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? He thinks if he can compromise me, make me look unprofessional, he can force the board to accept his buyout offer." Her hands were shaking now, and I let him. I let him use you because I was so desperate to feel something real that I didn't care about the consequences. Jesus, Trinity. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process what she was telling me. "Are you saying this whole thing has been some kind of corporate espionage?" I'm saying I don't know anymore. I'm saying I went into this thinking I could use you to get information about your father's plans, and instead, she trailed off, looking down at her hands. Instead, what? Instead, I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Because if I crossed it, if I let myself believe her, there would be no going back. Prove it, I said. She looked up at me, confused. What? Prove it. Prove that this is real and not just another corporate maneuver. For a moment, I thought she might argue, might give me some logical explanation for why proof wasn't necessary. Instead, she leaned forward and kissed me. It wasn't like the kiss in the parking lot. This was desperate, hungry, like she was trying to pour everything she couldn't say into the space between our lips. I kissed her back with equal intensity, my hands fisting in her hair as she pressed me back against the blanket. I love you, she whispered against my mouth. I love you, and I'm terrified of what that means. It means we figure this out together, I said, pulling her closer. It means we don't let him win. We made love under the stars, slow and tender and achingly real. And when we finally fell asleep, tangled together on that blanket, I knew that. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The next few weeks were a blur of late nights and stolen moments. Trinity and I worked together like we'd been doing it for years, digging through financial records and corporate filings, looking for any weakness we could exploit. She was brilliant, scary brilliant, and watching her mind work was like watching a master chess player 20 moves ahead of her opponent. Here, she said one night, pointing to a line buried deep in Hill Enterprises' quarterly report. This acquisition from 3 years ago, the numbers don't add up. I leaned over her shoulder, close enough to smell her shampoo. What kind of numbers? The kind that suggests your father has been cooking the books. We were in her home office, surrounded by takeout containers and empty coffee cups, and the rescue pup, now named Fortune, was asleep at our feet. Trinity had tried to resist keeping him, but he'd chosen her with the kind of stubborn determination that reminded me of myself. Can you prove it? Not yet. But if I can access his personal files, I can get you in, I said, and she looked up at me with those gray eyes that had become my favorite thing to get lost in. Layla, that's breaking and entering. It's visiting. My father's office, I still have a key. It's too dangerous. It's the only way. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Finally, she nodded. Okay, but we do this smart. We go in, we get what we need, and we get out. No heroics. Since when do I do heroics? Since you decided to take on one of the most powerful men in the city. I'm not taking him on alone. No, she said, reaching for my hand. You're not. Breaking into Hill Enterprises was easier than it should have been. The security guards knew me, and my key still worked on Dad's private elevator. We waited until after midnight, when the building was empty except for the cleaning crew, and made our way to the executive floor. Dad's office was exactly as I remembered it, all leather and mahogany, with photos of himself shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. The man had an ego the size of Texas and the moral compass of a used car salesman. His computers, password protected, Trinity said, settling behind his desk. Try Layla 1995, I said, and caught her surprised look. It's my birth year. He's not imaginative. It worked. Within minutes, Trinity was deep in his files, her fingers flying over the keyboard like she was conducting a symphony. I kept watch by the door, my heart pounding every time I heard a sound from the hallway. Got it, she said finally, transferring files to a thumb drive. 3 years of falsified reports, shell companies, money laundering. This is enough to bring down his entire empire. And save yours? And save mine? We were almost to the elevator when the lights came on. Well, Dad's voice echoed through the hallway. What do we have here? He was standing by the reception desk, looking like he'd been waiting for us. Behind him were two security guards who definitely weren't part of the regular crew. "Hello, Daddy," I said, stepping in front of Trinity. "Working late?" I could ask you the same thing. Though I suppose corporate espionage is a night shift kind of job. "We're not the ones cooking the books," Trinity said, her voice steady. Despite the situation we'd found ourselves in. "Miss Cooper, I have to say I'm disappointed. I expected better from someone of your reputation." "The only thing you should expect is a call from the FBI," I said, and his smile faltered. "Now, Layla, there's no need for threats. We're all reasonable people here. I'm sure we can work something out." "Like what?" "Like you give me that thumb drive, and I don't have you both arrested for breaking and entering." "You're bluffing, am I?" The security guard stepped forward, and I felt Trinity tense behind me. This was about to get ugly. "Let her go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is between you and me." "Oh, but it's not," Dad said, his voice taking on that cold edge I remembered from childhood. "You see, Miss Cooper has something I want, and now I have something she wants." "What?" "You." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I felt Trinity's hand on my arm squeezing tight. "I'll make you a deal," Dad continued. "She walks away from this, from you, from everything, and I'll let you both leave tonight. Otherwise, Otherwise what?" "Otherwise, I destroy her. Her company, her reputation, her life, and you get to watch." I looked at Trinity, saw the fear in her eyes, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. He would do it. He would destroy her just to prove a point. "No deal," I said. "Layla," Trinity whispered. "No deal," I repeated, louder this time. "Because you're forgetting something, Dad. I'm not the scared little girl you used to push around. And she's not some helpless CEO you can intimidate. Is that so?" "That's so. Because while you've been playing games, we've been playing war, and we're about to win." I pulled out my phone and hit a button. Dad's eyes widened as he realized what I'd done. "Smile," I said. "You live on every major news network in the city." The live stream was Trinity's idea. She'd arranged for a direct feed to every major media outlet, timed to go live the moment we accessed Dad's files. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. "The evidence we've uncovered tonight," Trinity said, speaking directly to the camera, "shows a pattern of fraud and embezzlement spanning 3 years. Hill Enterprises has been systematically stealing from their investors and manipulating their stock price through a network of shell companies." Dad's face went white. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can," I said, holding up the thumb drive. "It's all here. Every transaction, every falsified report, every illegal transfer. And now it's all public record." The security guards looked between us and Dad, clearly unsure of what to do. You could see the moment they realized they were on the wrong side of this fight. "You've destroyed everything," Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've saved everything," I corrected, including myself. The FBI arrived 20 minutes later, followed by reporters and camera crews. Dad was led away in handcuffs, still sputtering about how this was all a misunderstanding. The security guards he'd hired scattered like roaches when the lights come on. Trinity and I gave our statements, turned over the evidence, and somehow found ourselves back at her penthouse as the sun was rising over the city. We were both exhausted, running on adrenaline and too much coffee, but we'd won. "So what happens now?" I asked, collapsing onto her couch. "Now the FBI builds their case, your father goes to trial, and Cooper Enterprises survives another day. And us?" She sat down beside me, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "I don't know. I've never been good at the after part. Lucky for you, I'm excellent at it. Is that so? That's so. See, I've been thinking about this whole thing and I realized something. What's that? You don't need to choose between being a CEO and being human. You can be both. I don't know how to do both. Then let me show you. I kissed her then, slow and gentle and full of promise. She kissed me back like she was coming. Home. I love you, she whispered against my lips. I love you too. 6 months later, Cooper Enterprises looked completely different. Gone were the sterile gray walls and corporate artwork. In their place were photos of rescue animals, hand-drawn. Cards from the kids at the shelter, and a living wall of plants that made the whole building feel alive. Trinity had restructured the company around a new mission, sustainable business practices that gave back to the community. It was radical, it was risky, and it was working. Stock prices had initially dipped, but they'd recovered stronger than ever as investors realized they were backing something real. The board thinks you're a miracle worker, I told her, finding her in her office going over the latest quarterly reports. The board thinks I've lost my mind, she corrected, but she was smiling. Have you, completely? I walked around her desk and spun her chair to face me. She was wearing jeans and a Cooper Enterprises t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked about 10 years younger and infinitely happier. Any regrets? I asked. Only that it took me so long to figure out what I wanted. And what's that? You, this, a life that means something. We'd moved in together the month before, combining her penthouse minimalism with my thrift store furniture and Fortune's growing collection of toys. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did, like everything else about us. Speaking of things, that means something, I said, pulling a small box from my pocket. I have something for you. She looked at the box, then at me, her eyes widening. Lila ... double quote. Before you say anything, just let me do this right, okay? I dropped to one knee right there in her office, with the afternoon sun streaming through. The windows and the sounds of the city filtering in from below. Trinity Cooper, I said, opening the box to reveal a simple silver band. You changed my life in the most beautiful way possible. You made me believe in happily ever after, in the power of second chances, and the idea that love really can conquer all. Will you marry me? She was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. Yes, yes, of course, yes. I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled me up for a kiss that tasted like tears and forever. I have something for you, too, she said, reaching into her desk drawer. Trinity, you don't have to. She pulled out a collar. A leather dog collar with a small gold tag that read Fortune Hill Cooper. He's officially yours now, she said. I figured it was time he had a real family. I was crying now too, ugly tears that made my nose run and my vision blur. Are you trying to make me fall in love with you all over again? Is it working? Completely. The second proposal happened 2 weeks later, in the same woods where we'd first admitted we loved each other. I planned it for months, down to the last detail, because Trinity deserved something perfect. Why are we here? She asked as we walked along the familiar trail. Because this is where everything started, I said, adjusting the backpack full of supplies. This is where you first told me you loved me. I seem to remember you demanded proof, and you delivered, spectacularly. We reached the clearing just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I spread out the same blanket we'd used before, along with a picnic basket full of all her favorite foods. This is lovely, she said, settling down beside me, but you're being unusually romantic. Should I be worried? You should be prepared. For what? I stood up and brushed off my jeans, then dropped to one knee for the second time in 2 weeks. Her hand flew to her mouth. I know I already proposed, I said, pulling out a second ring box, but that was about the future. This is about right. Now, Trinity Cooper, Will you marry me tonight? She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Tonight? Tonight? I've got an officiant waiting back at the shelter, a minister who's been helping with the kids' program. I've got Fortune in a bow tie, and I've got a justice of the peace on standby. All I need is you. Layla, we can't just, why not? We've spent our whole lives doing what other people expected us to do. Let's do something crazy. Let's do something that's just for us. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the ring in my hand. It was different from the first one. This one had a small diamond surrounded by tiny sapphires that caught the last light of the day. What about a real wedding? She asked. With flowers and a dress, and we can have that too if you want. But tonight, I just want to promise you forever. I wanted to make it official before the world has a chance to interfere. She looked at me for a long moment, then started laughing. You're insane. Completely. I can't believe I'm saying this, but yes, let's get married tonight. We drove back to the shelter with the windows down and the radio blasting, Fortune barking excitedly from the back seat like he knew something special was happening. The officiant was waiting for us in the main room, along with a small group of the kids from the program and a few of the volunteers. Trinity looked beautiful in her jeans and sweater, her hair wild from the wind and her face flushed with excitement. I'd never seen her look more perfect. Do you, Trinity Cooper, take Layla Hill to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, she said, her voice steady and sure. Do you, Layla Hill, take Trinity Cooper to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. Then by the power vested in me by the state of California, I now pronounce you married. You may kiss your bride. We kissed to the sound of cheering children and barking dogs, and I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it together. 1 year later, Cooper Hill Enterprises was the talk of the business world. We'd merged Trinity's company with the shelter, creating a new model for corporate responsibility. Half our profits went to animal rescue and children's programs, and our employees got paid time off to volunteer. The Times wants to do a feature story, Trinity said, walking into our shared office with a cup of coffee and Fortune at her heels. About the company, about us, the power couple who revolutionized corporate America. I groaned. Can we say no? We can. But think about all the good it could do. Think about all the other companies that might follow our lead. She was right, of course. She usually was. Trinity had this way of seeing the bigger picture, of understanding how our little revolution could inspire others. Fine, I said, but I get to wear jeans in the photos. Deal. We were planning our official wedding for the following spring, the big celebration Trinity had wanted, with flowers and a dress and all our friends and family. But the little ceremony at the shelter would always be my favorite. Just us, the animals, and the promise of forever. Any regrets? I asked the same question I'd asked her a year ago. Only that we didn't do this sooner, she said, settling into my lap and wrapping her arms around my neck. Think we would have been ready sooner? Probably not. I think we needed to become the people we were meant to be before we could find each other. Very philosophical for a Tuesday morning. I'm a very philosophical person. You're a very beautiful person. She kissed me then, slow and sweet and full of promise. Outside our window, the city hummed with life, and somewhere in the shelter, a dog barked happily at a child's laughter. I love you, Mrs. Hill Cooper, I whispered against her lips. I love you too, Mrs. Hill Cooper. And in that moment, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I knew that we'd found something worth fighting for. We'd found each other, and we'd found a way to make the world a little bit better in the process. They said love was a transaction, a negotiation between two parties looking for the best deal. Trinity and I had proved them wrong. We'd rewritten the rules, torn up the contracts, and built something real from the ashes of everything we'd thought we wanted. In the end, that was our greatest victory. Not the company we'd saved, or the animals we'd rescued, or the children we'd helped. It was the love we'd found in each other, the family we'd created, and the future we'd built together. As fortune settled down for his afternoon nap and Trinity went back to her quarterly reports, I looked around our office, half corporate boardroom, half animal shelter, and smiled. We'd come a long way from that first night in the Mercedes when she was just another CEO and I was just another chauffeur. Now we were partners in every sense of the word. In business, in life, and love. Love. And if that wasn't a fairy tale ending, I didn't know what was. The story of Trinity and Layla didn't end with a wedding or a merger or even a happy ever after. It ended with the beginning of a life lived on their own terms, with their own rules and their own definition of success. And if you asked me, that was the most beautiful ending of all.